Hey comic fans, Scott Harris King here, and today I've got a video that is both a haul video and a complete run madness video because I just got in the complete run of the Malibu comic series Protectors. So I'm going to show you all 20 issues plus the handbook as well that has all the character bios and stuff like that. So we'll be going over the whole thing. Now, this is a series that I actually bought off the stands when it was coming out in the mid-90s. So at one point I had this complete run, but over the decades it disappeared somewhere. But I really wanted to get it back, mainly because in the 90s, when I was reading these books originally, I didn't actually realize that the characters in Protectors, most of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, were public domain Golden Age characters. And that's obviously something that's particularly interest to me now because of the comics that I make, my series, The Crime Busters and Cthulhu vs. Uncle Sam. I use a lot of public domain characters, a lot of public domain Golden Age superheroes that I've redesigned. Some of the characters that I use are actually different versions of them are in Protectors, and again, I had no idea at the time, and I had completely forgotten about them in Protectors. But as an area of interest for me, the use of public domain Golden Age characters, I wanted to get this series back. Now, it's very 90s, but I remember enjoying it at the time. So let me just show you all 20 issues of Protectors, and I'll talk a little bit about various aspects of the series. Here's issue 1 of Protectors, and we can see some of the characters. This here is like an extra outer layer paper half cover, so you can fold this back and see the rest of the cover. This was the direct market edition. Interestingly, if you look inside these books where they have the Malibu actually has in all of these issues like a 2-page advertisement with a list of all of the back issues and stuff that they have for sale. And the direct edition with this extra paper outer cover is more expensive than the regular newsstand edition that doesn't have it. Not really sure what exactly this is supposed to add to anything, but we have the first issue here. One thing I want to mention is that the cover artist on several of these early covers, it's a guy by the name of Samuel Clark Hawbaker. Now, I'm not familiar with his work. I tried to look him up a little bit earlier. It seems like he did some stuff for Marvel in the 90s. So he's been around a little bit. But actually, I quite like his artwork. He's got a couple of these covers that are really cool. And the style of the art, I really dig. This is issue 2. And the next issue 3 has a really cool cover that I like. But again, just to go back to some of the characters. So Man of War is this character that we see here with a flaming sword. It's a Golden Age character. The eye in the Golden Age was actually a giant floating eyeball. Here, it's an old wizard guy called the Eye that has an eye on his robe. So he's sort of like the Doctor Strange of this universe. But again, in the original comics, he was just a giant eyeball. This is a guy called the Arrow, who is exactly what you would think. It's a guy that shoots arrows. A lot of these characters appeared in Centaur. That was the publisher that was publishing in the late 30s. And so a lot of these characters are Centaur, but not all of them. And then here's issue 3, and again, really, really well done cover. Like the line work, there's a certain sketchiness to it, but the design, the line work, like these covers for these first 3 issues are excellent. And then after that, they start bringing in other people to do some of the covers, but the really, really good work. The writer on this is a guy named R.A. Jones, and I'll talk a little bit. The end of this series is something I meant to mention that right up top, but this has one of the craziest endings to a series that I've ever read. We'll get to that when we get to the last issue 20. But after the series ended, over the last decade, 2 decades, R.A. Jones has actually done continued sort of working in this field, but in prose novels. He has this line of prose novels that are also using public domain Golden Age characters that have been reimagined. My understanding is, I think, I haven't read them, but I've read people talking about them. I think that those are actually set in the Golden Age, whereas these are set in the present day, which is the mid 90s. And he's described that as sort of like the Earth 2 version of Protectors. Here's issue 4. And here we're starting to get some different artists coming in. One thing that's really interesting about this is that they basically launched a whole line of comics all at once. Protectors is the main series, but they also launched individual titles for several of the characters in Protectors at the same time. So, like, in issue 1, there are house ads. Whoops, that's upside down. In issue 1, there are house ads for the Ferret, number 1, and it says, "From the pages of Protectors," which is interesting because Ferret's not actually in issue 1. And then it also says, there's an ad for the Arrow number 1, and it says, "From the pages of Protectors." He's also not in issue 1. So it's interesting that those came out at the same time, advertising them as being spin-offs from Protectors. Neither of those characters are in the first issue Protectors, but they are in later issues. So here's the infamous issue 5. Now, I have another copy of this that I got about a year ago, so I showed it off relatively recently in a video. As you can see, this is still polybagged. I will say, like, the guy I got these from on eBay, these are all in top-notch condition. They were clearly, like, bagged and boarded in the 90s when someone got them, and I'm not sure anyone's opened them since. They may not have opened them at the time. So they're all, like, in almost perfect mint condition. This is still in the original poly bag, and you can see on the poly bag it says, "First ever Force Beam Hole comic." And then there's a hole that has been punched through the entire comic, which is also, as you can see, a laser beam, force beam hole right through the chest of this character, and it's just gory, covered with blood everywhere. And it says, "This issue, the death of a Protector." So this is like peak 90s gimmick nonsense. I've heard that there was an indie book, and I forget what it is. Part of me wants to say it was Milk and Cheese or something. There was an indie book that did something similar before this. And what they did with the indie book was that they designed the whole book around having a hole in it. And then after they had drawn, like, every page had something interact with this hole in the book. And then with that, they actually, after it was printed, they, like, put the copies of the comics up against a target and shot through it with a rifle, with an actual gun. They did not do that with this. This seems like a late idea, because this hole that's punched through the comic was not designed with that in mind, and so this goes right through artwork. It goes through word balloons. It just completely screws up the whole comic. In terms of story, basically, it's the sort of thing that has been done a lot, even before this, but also since, where it was like, there's a new generation of heroes, and so the government had a crackdown on heroes after some sort of big disaster had happened. It's very Watchmen, and now some villains have showed up, and so the government's decided it's time to reactivate the heroes, but now the team of heroes, the Protectors, is going to be working directly for the government. So they get this old guy who was a superhero during World War II, and so he's like in his 70s or however old he was be at this time, and he used to be this guy called Night Mask or something, and basically his grandson shows up, and has been allowed to join the team and carrying on his grandfather's legacy, but he doesn't have any powers or any experience. He's got absolutely nothing going for them other than the fact that his grandfather is a superhero. And so this is the issue where he gets horribly massacred during one of their first missions. It's that sort of thing. Mention the spin-off titles. Here's issue 6. And we have this character Gravestone. That's the guy that we've seen on a few covers. He's on the next one as well. And Gravestone is sort of this mysterious guy with like a skull mask and hell powers. He's kind of like Ghost Rider, sort of. He also got his own series as well. That was a spin-off right at the beginning. So in addition to this, they had the Arrow, they had Ferret, they had Gravestone. They launched a whole bunch of stuff. And there's a couple other comics in the line that I'm going to get to in a minute, which don't seem to have anything to do with this. But here's issue 7, and this has the Ferret on it. And the Ferret is an absolutely terrible, stupid character who's basically one of these Wolverine knockoffs. So he's actually closer to the Badger, who is also a Wolverine knockoff. So he's basically like, he's the wild guy. He can't be controlled. He's violent. He's named after a feral little animal, just like the Badger and Wolverine. It's the Ferret. And for some reason, he looks like he's like the backup drummer for Def Leppard. So I don't know. It's very 90s and stupid. But you can also see like the art in these isn't as good. You could see that like compared to the first 3 issues where they had those great covers, really, just the line work on these is just not up to the same level. So there's issue 7. Here's issue 8. Will another protector die? They're really leaning hard into this, and they're using all of these Golden Age, revamped versions of Golden Age characters, updated for the 90s. So they have like hundreds of characters they can pick from. So it's very easy to kill some of them off when you can just bring in new characters. And sure enough, issue 9, it says on the cover, "No, Gravestone, you can't be dead." This issue, the death of a protector. I don't remember if Gravestone actually dies in this issue. I don't think so. I'm pretty sure someone else does. This is by a guy named Darenick, who is the interior artist for about the first half of the run. A lot of these have inking credited to Diodato. It doesn't say Mike Diodato. It just says Diodato. And my understanding is that Diodato, at this time, had basically created a whole Golden Age style art studio. And so there's a lot of books that are signed Diodato or Mike Diodato that he didn't work on at all. He had all of these art students and, interns and proteges and people working for him to turn out a ton of work. That's why if you see Diodato work from the 90s, sometimes it's really good and a lot of times it's really crappy, and the level of work coming out of the Diodato studios varies wildly, and he got a kind of a bad reputation at the time because of that. Here's issue 10, introducing the awesome power of Black Fury, which is again a take on a Golden Age character. Here's the new Night Mask. Now there's a new Night Mask as a woman after the guy got force beamed in issue 5. Here by issue 10, there's a new character who has taken on the identity. She actually has superpowers, so that's a big help. Issue 11, all action issue, and we've got some new characters here, featuring Miss Fury. Again, it's another Golden Age character. There's a big giant guy. I don't remember what his name is. But we got it's just, it's solid superhero stuff. At least as good as a lot of stuff coming out of the 90s. Maybe better. We get some weird cheesecake here on the cover of issue 12. I find the composition of this cover to be a little strange. I mean, the style is different. It's done in sort of like a... it looks to me like it wasn't inked. Like it was done all pencil, and then they colored directly over the pencil. And so it gives it a little bit of a painterly feel. But the weird angle where she's got a... It's like this character has some ties that are attached to the back of her mask, and the other character is choking her and she's trying to get free. It's just a weird angle design. I don't know. But something important in this issue, it says here, Prelude to Genesis. Now, I mentioned I was going to talk about some other titles in this universe. So, in addition to all of the solo titles that spun out of Protectors, there were 2 other titles that were taking place in the same shared universe. One of them was called X Mutants, EX-Mutants. And I don't really know what that's about other than the title, but it's superhero. It's like instead of doing a Golden Age superhero riff, it's doing an X-Men superhero riff. But anyway, X Mutants. And then bizarrely, the third title that takes place in this universe is called Dinosaurs for Hire. And it's sort of a comedic series about a bunch of mercenaries who are also dinosaur people. So this is Genesis crossing over here. We'll see the next issue 13. It says Genesis Part 3. That's because Part 1 was in an issue of X Mutants, and Part 2 was in Dinosaurs for Hire. And then Part 3 is here in Protectors. And this crossover goes on for a while. Now, a couple things I wanted to mention is that this design, this looks very similar to some Avengers crossover stuff that was happening at the same time, in the same time frame. They had this crossover with the X-Men that involved some stupid X-Men character I can't remember the name of. And they had a very similar design with this vertical thing here. The other thing I want to mention is that the big bad guy, this big bad guy, that's who they're all fighting in this crossover, is called Extreme. And so it's interesting to me to go from this sort of painterly sketch cover one issue to full mid-90s art style, character called Extreme, design aesthetic. And so here we are, Genesis Part 3. Then you have to go over to those other titles for 4 and 5. I don't have the crossovers. And here is Extreme in the final part of Genesis Part 6. Now, one thing of interest here is the artist doing this cover. You can see the signature there. It's Rich Buckler. Of course, Rich Buckler has a long history of working with Golden Age superhero revivals because he was in charge of, over a decade before this, Archie Comics attempted to relaunch their line of superhero books in the early 80s. That didn't work out either. Now, something kind of strange happens after this. This is Genesis Part 6. It's the last part of Genesis, right? So you may be wondering when you get the next issue why this says Genesis at the top. In fact, this thing that says Genesis is at the top of every issue of the series for the rest of the entire run. So in issue 12, you get Prelude to Genesis. 13 and 14 are actually part of Genesis, the crossover. And then 15, you get this Genesis logo, but that story's over. So why did they do this? Well, a little bit before this, Malibu had launched their Ultraverse line, and the Ultraverse was a completely separate superhero universe that eventually had ties to the Marvel universe when Marvel bought Malibu. And so the Ultraverse line has a big logo across the top that says Ultraverse, so that you would know it's not in the same Malibu universe as these other books. And so they started putting Genesis on these titles so you would know that one of these is the Genesis universe, I guess, and the other is the Ultraverse. It's a little confusing because when we get to issue 20, we'll see that they have an announcement about the end of the line of comics. And they actually don't call it the Genesis universe. They call it something totally different that it's not actually even tagged with. So it gets very confusing here with their sort of their publishing and their marketing, and the company's kind of splintering in different directions. They have all these different sublines of comics. Marvel's getting involved. One thing I wanted to mention, I forgot to mention it, is they changed from this original Malibu logo here, which looks like the McDonald's logo. After issue 9, they changed it to this one here, which is a much better logo. Okay. Here's issue 16, The Trial of Manowar. And they've introduced this new, very 90s character named Chalice, who's sort of a hard ass, who's been brought in to keep the heroes in line and whatever. Okay. 17, we start getting, basically, there's this big storyline that goes through the last few issues, where this big villain, which I'm going to get into when I show you issue 20, starts opening portals to different alternate universes. It's one of those. Here's issue 18. The art's going downhill here for me. No offense. But it's just taken a step down from where it was at the beginning of the run. Here's issue 19, which I'm fine with the concept of this cover, but there's some issues with the execution. It's one of these things where there's supposed to be a villain in the foreground. We have all these defeated heroes on the ground, and then the remaining heroes are looking at the villain like, oh my goodness, it's him. Except the way they cropped it, you can barely tell that there's a guy there. And it seems to really be a cropping issue, because if you look down here, you'll notice that they've cropped out half of the artist signatures, which, I mean, they could take 10 seconds. Look, this whole corner is empty. It would take 10 seconds of design work to just basically move that up so you can read them. But it shows me that there was more artwork on the edges. They zoomed in too far for whatever reason when they were doing this. All right, finally, issue 20, with a totally different cover style. It's interesting. There's a bit of like photography going on here, almost, I think. Basically, the Earth here also has some digital manipulation, which is brand new for the mid-90s, where the Earth here is sort of blurred out a little bit. It's like it's out of focus, and the focus is on this big dude here. Now, I'm going to pop this open to get into this. So the bad guy here is a character called The Great Question. And a couple interesting things. Once again, the Great Question is another Centaur character. Amazing Man is his arch enemy from back in the 30s, and Amazing Man is also one of the characters in Protectors. So they're bringing a lot of stuff from the Centaur universe. Here's their version of the Great Question, which is total 90s superhero design. I had forgotten this character was the main bad guy at the end of this series. It's of interest to me because I'm actually using a Great Question in Crime Busters as sort of the head of the cult of Cthulhu in Crime Busters. And he's sort of the main bad guy behind the scenes manipulating things. We've only seen him once basically so far. But I was basically dipping into the same well of Golden Age things and coming out with a completely different take on the character, which is one thing I love about these Golden Age characters. I also want, before I get to how this actually ends, I wanted to mention that in here they call this universe the Eternity line of comics. I don't know why they called it that. Maybe if I had been, like, at the time, maybe it made sense. But there's nothing anywhere in here that says anything about eternity. It's not... None of these say eternity anywhere on them. They say Genesis on all of them. They don't say anything about eternity, but apparently this is part of the eternity line of comics. And at some point, Dinosaurs for Hire was canceled, and all of the solo titles have also ended as well. So at this point, the only thing still going are Protectors, issue 20, X Mutants on issue 18, and both of those are canceled. So it's the end of this entire line of comics, right? And so R.A. Jones, who's written the whole thing, decides to really go out with a literal bang, because the end of this series is one of the craziest endings to like an ongoing comic series that I can remember. I mean, the bar for me is like Combat Kelly is number one, right? The end of that series. In some ways, this is more surprising, because what happens is our bad guys here, like, there's this big battle where they face off against all their arch enemies, and they kill off, like, one guy who's sort of been their main enemy at the first half of the series. He gets killed, and the Great Question is opening all of these portals to all these universes so he can draw power from them. But then something goes wrong, and he starts being pulled into all the different dimensions, and he can't stop it, and he's basically ripped apart by reality itself and explodes. And so our characters are like, well, I guess we won, right? But there's something kind of inexplicable that goes on in the middle of this story. While he's opening his portals, another portal opens. He opens the largest portal of all, and this random character appears. I don't know if he comes out of the portal. I have to say I wasn't maybe reading it quite as closely as I should have been. But there's this character named Nowhere Man who's appeared, who's some sort of interdimensional guy. And he's basically like, oh crap, the universe is dying. Because when all the other portals disappear with the death of the Great Question, this one big last portal stays there. And so all the heroes are like, well, we've killed all the bad guys. All the other portals ended. We've saved the day. And then someone's like, actually, that portal's going to destroy the planet. And all of our heroes are like, how do we stop it? And someone's like, well, we can't, because it's about to happen, and then it blows up. And the universe ends. So at the end of the series, and at the end of this last issue, the heroes fail to save the world, and the world explodes. Here it is. Here's the Earth exploding in a cataclysmic fireball. And then we get a page that's basically showing all the dead heroes that just failed. And a thing saying, if the legend of these events survives, their deeds will be spoken of with reverence. They were protectors, it will be said. They always fight for the right. And in the end, when it mattered most, they died the way they had lived, as heroes. And that's the end. Yep. This superhero universe ends with the heroes failing, the Earth exploding in a giant fireball, all the characters dying, and none of them are ever published again. So I think it was a fantastic ending. Obviously, they knew that the entire line of comics had been ended. Now, again, I didn't do a full research like maybe I should have, but I'm pretty sure this was after Marvel had bought Malibu. It says at the end, in the like letter column thing at the end about the universe being canceled, basically it says that Malibu's putting all of their energy into the Ultraverse, and they just can't be bothered anymore with Protectors or X-Mutants, so they're just canceling them all. So obviously the writers, the creative team knew this was coming. They knew that their line of comics was ending. And it's a kind of a fantastic, almost like protest story to just blow the whole planet up and say, okay, we're ending, fine. Let's just destroy the whole thing then, if that's what you want. So that's the Protectors. I also want to show you this here. It's Protectors Handbook #1. This is another Hawbaker cover. And the art, again, on these Hawbaker covers is so much better than really anything else in the series. This is basically like a who's who in the Genesis universe, or whatever they called it there. It's basically a handbook. It's like a Marvel Universe guidebook. Every page has got a picture of one of the characters and then like a little bio and that sort of thing. So it has all the heroes and villains from Protectors in it. So it's cool. It's a fun little side resource. But that's it. It's a very 90s take on very 1930s characters, culminating in one of the craziest endings that I've ever read in a comic series. So that's the Protectors, and that's my haul. Just got these in from eBay. Let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you next time.